A gunshot cracked through the station, and every head hit the floor. Wood splintered off the ticket booth, inches from a man's skull. Someone screamed. Boots pounded the platform, scattering fast toward the tracks, people shoving each other just to get clear. Smoke still curled from the barrel when a trunk hit the ground and popped open on its own hinges. Nobody expected what rolled out of it. A woman stood over that trunk, hands steady, eyes locked on the shooter like she'd done this before, like she'd been waiting for it. She hadn't come alone. Her name was Eliza, and the man who ordered her as a bride had no idea what he was about to marry. The shooter froze. Then he ran, boots slipping on the wood. What was inside that trunk that made a grown man drop his weapon and bolt? Stay with me. You're not going to believe where this story goes. The platform stayed quiet for a long moment after the shooter disappeared past the freight cars. Then people started moving again, slow, like they weren't sure it was safe. A porter came out from behind a stack of crates. Two women who'd been crouched by the ticket window stood up and brushed off their skirts, not saying a word, just staring at Eliza. She knelt down and closed the trunk. Didn't rush it. Didn't look around to see who was watching. Just folded the lid shut and latched it, the way a person might close a suitcase after checking they hadn't forgotten anything. That was when Nathaniel Calloway pushed through what was left of the crowd. He was a big man, sun-worn, the kind of face that had spent 30 years outdoors and looked it. He'd been standing near the stock pens when the shot went off, and he'd run the whole way, boots kicking up dust, expecting the worst. What he found instead was a woman crouched over a trunk, calm as a Sunday morning, like nothing had happened at all. "Ma'am," he said, out of breath. "Are you hurt?" Eliza looked up at him. Didn't answer right away, just studied his face like she was deciding something. "No," she said. "I'm fine. That was a gunshot. Somebody was shooting at you." "Wasn't shooting at me." He didn't know what to make of that. He'd come to the station expecting to meet a stranger off the noon train, a woman he'd only known through letters and a photograph the matchmaking agency in Kansas City had sent him 3 months back. He'd pictured someone nervous, someone who'd need steadying after a long trip alone, not someone who watched a man run off with a gun in his hand and didn't so much as raise her voice. The crowd hadn't fully scattered. A few men stood near the depot office, talking low, glancing over at Eliza every few seconds. "That's the 3rd time this year," one of them said. "Right here at the station." "Reeves boys again," said another. "You know it is." Nathaniel caught the name. Silas Reeve owned half the county on paper, and the other half through debts men couldn't pay. Everybody in town knew his name, and everybody knew better than to say much about him out loud. But here they were, saying it plain, right in front of a woman who'd just arrived on the train. "You know something about that?" Nathaniel asked her. "I know a man ran," she said. "That's all." It wasn't much of an answer, and she didn't offer more. She stood, brushed the dust off her skirt, and looked at him steady. "You're Nathaniel Calloway." "I am." "Eliza." She didn't give a last name. Just that. He waited for more. It didn't come. "There a place we can talk," she said. "Away from town?" "The ranch is an hour out." "Good. Let's go there." He glanced at the trunk, still latched, still sitting there like it hadn't just spilled its contents across the platform for half the town to nearly see. "That's a strange thing to carry all this way," he said. "It's mine," she said, in a tone that closed the subject before he could open it further. He picked it up anyway, because that's what a man did for a woman he'd sent for, and it was heavier than he expected, heavier than clothes and keepsakes had any right to be. Neither of them said much on the walk to the wagon. The whispers followed them the whole way. The wagon rolled out of town slow, wheels catching every rut in the road. Nathaniel kept glancing sideways at Eliza, trying to read her, but she just watched the fields go by like she'd made this trip 100 times before. "You want to tell me what that was back there?" he finally said. "Not particularly." A man shot at a train station in broad daylight. Folks don't just shrug that off. I'm not shrugging it off. I'm choosing not to talk about it on a wagon. He let that sit. The road narrowed, cutting through a stretch of scrub brush, and the trunk shifted in the back with every bump. At one point it slid hard against the sideboard, and the latch popped loose. Nathaniel reached back without thinking, meaning to steady it, and his hand brushed the lid open an inch. He saw metal, just a flash of it, dark and oiled, the shape of a gun barrel where clothes should have been. He pulled his hand back like he'd touched a stove. Eliza turned and saw his face. "Don't," she said. "Not sharp. Just final." He shut the trunk and refastened the latch himself, and for the rest of the ride neither of them said a word about it. But it sat between them now, the way a thing does once you've seen it and can't unsee it. He'd asked for a bride. What he'd picked up at that station was carrying a firearm packed in with her dresses, and she wasn't the least bit sorry about it. The ranch came into view as the sun dropped low, a low house with a porch running the length of it, a barn off to the side, cattle scattered across the near pasture. Smoke curled from the chimney where his hired hand, an older man named Wyatt, had already started supper. Nathaniel set the trunk down inside the front room himself, careful with it now in a way he hadn't been before. Eliza thanked him, short and plain, and asked where she might wash up before supper. He showed her the room that would be hers. It had been his mother's once, before she passed, and he'd fixed it up best he could in the weeks since the agency wrote back saying a woman named Eliza had accepted his letters. He didn't say any of that, just pointed her to the basin and the pitcher of water and left her to it. Supper was quiet. Wyatt kept sneaking looks at Eliza across the table, and she noticed, and she didn't seem to mind. She ate like a woman who'd gone a long stretch without a proper meal, and when Wyatt asked her how the train ride had been, she said it was fine, no trouble at all, like there hadn't been a bullet fired 10 feet from where she stood that same afternoon. After the plates were cleared, Nathaniel lit the lamp on the porch and sat out there with a cup of coffee, the way he did most evenings. Eliza came out a few minutes later and sat in the chair across from him without being asked. The night had gone still. Crickets going in the grass, a horse shifting somewhere in the corral, nothing else. Long day, she said. Longest one I've had in a while, he said, and almost laughed, though nothing about it had been funny. She wrapped both hands around her own cup and looked out at the dark shape of the barn, the fence line beyond it, the stars just starting to show. It's peaceful out here, she said. Most nights it is. She nodded slow, like she was letting herself believe that for the first time since she'd stepped off the train. Her shoulders came down some. The tightness that had been sitting in her jaw all afternoon eased off, just a little. Nathaniel watched her and let himself think, for a moment, that maybe the trouble back at the station had been a stranger's trouble, nothing to do with her at all, just bad luck and bad timing on the day she happened to arrive. Maybe the gun in that trunk was for protection, nothing more. A woman traveling alone had reasons enough for that. The coffee was warm. The porch was quiet. Somewhere past the tree line an owl called out twice and went silent. For a little while, sitting there in the lamplight, it felt like nothing bad had happened at all, like the whole day had been a strange dream already fading, and all that was left was two people getting to know each other on a porch, same as any other night. The sound came fast, hooves pounding hard down the road toward the ranch, a rider pushing his horse well past what any sensible man would at that hour. Nathaniel was on his feet before the horse even reached the gate. The rider didn't slow. He flung something toward the porch, a folded scrap of paper weighted with a stone, and kept riding, disappearing back into the dark the same way he'd come. Nathaniel picked it up with his hands, shaking just slightly. Eliza was already beside him, closer than he'd noticed her move. He unfolded it. 3 words, scrawled fast. We know. Leave. Eliza read it once, and her whole posture changed. The ease she'd carried on the porch a minute earlier was gone, wiped clean, like it had never been there. They found me already, she said, more to herself than to him. Who's they? She didn't answer. She turned and walked straight into the house, and Nathaniel followed her, the coffee cup still sitting forgotten on the porch rail. She went to the trunk in the front room and knelt beside it. This time she didn't just crack the lid an inch. She threw it open all the way, both hands, like there was no more point in hiding anything. Nathaniel stood over her shoulder and looked down into it. There was the gun rig he'd already seen a flash of on the wagon, oiled leather, a revolver sitting snug in its holster. Beside it, folded in a cloth, a silver badge caught the lamplight, a 5-pointed star stamped into it, the words Pinkerton National Detective Agency circling the edge. And underneath all of it, a thick stack of papers, tied with string, names written across the top page in careful, even handwriting. Nathaniel didn't need to read far. The third name down was Silas Reeve. I'm not a bride, Eliza said. Not only that. Nathaniel stared at her, then at the badge, then back at her again, like he was trying to make the two things sit together in his head, and they wouldn't. I work for the agency, she said. The real one. Not the matchmaking service you wrote to. I was sent west under a different name, put through the marriage bureau because it was the cleanest way to get into this county without Reeves' men asking questions about who I was or why I'd come. You used me. I needed a reason to be here that wouldn't get me killed the first week. If you're still with me, this is the part where the story stops being about a wedding and starts being about something a lot more dangerous. Hit that subscribe button, because what happens next changes everything for both of them. Nathaniel picked up the top page off the stack. Names, dates, sums of money written in neat columns. Deeds signed over under threat. Men who'd lost land they'd owned for 20 years. All of it tracing back to accounts controlled by Reeve. This is why they shot at you, he said. They didn't know it was me for certain. Not until tonight, it seems. She nodded at the note still crumpled in his hand. Now they do. Then why keep going? Pack up. Head back east. Let somebody else finish this. Because 3 men are already dead over these papers, she said. Men who talked to me before I ever got on that train. I'm not walking away and letting that count for nothing. Nathaniel set the page down slow, like it had gotten heavier the longer he held it. He'd sent for a bride because the ranch was too quiet and too big for one man, because he was tired of eating alone and talking to Wyatt and the cattle and nobody else for weeks at a stretch. He hadn't sent for this. A woman with a badge and a gun and a dead man's ledger of names, and Silas Reeves' boys now aware exactly where she'd gone to ground. They'll come here, he said. It wasn't a question. Probably. You could have told me that before I signed the papers to marry you. Would you have said no? He didn't answer right away, and that silence told her plenty. Outside, the horse that had carried the rider was long gone, but the ranch didn't feel quiet anymore. It felt like a place people were already watching. Nathaniel didn't sleep that night. He sat in the front room with a rifle across his knees, listening to every sound the ranch made, every creak of the porch boards settling, every shift of wind through the barn door. Eliza sat across from him with the revolver from the trunk resting on the table, loaded, the Pinkerton badge pinned now to the inside of her coat, where it wouldn't catch lamplight. They won't come tonight, she said. Reeve doesn't move fast. He'll want to know what I've already sent east before he risks more men. You've sent something. Copies. 3 days ago, before the train even reached this county. If something happens to me, those papers land on a federal judge's desk in Kansas City. Nathaniel looked at her a long moment. That why you're still breathing? That's why I'm still breathing. They came 2 mornings later, not at night, not sneaking, but riding straight up the road in plain daylight like men who didn't expect to need to hide. 4 of them. Wyatt spotted the dust first from the barn and came running, and Nathaniel was already reaching for the rifle by the time the rider slowed at the gate. The lead man was broad through the shoulders, a scar cutting through one eyebrow, and he didn't bother dismounting. Calloway, he called out. We're not here for you. Send the woman out, and nobody's got a problem today. Eliza stepped onto the porch before Nathaniel could answer for her. I'm right here, she said. You can tell Reeve that. Mr. Reeve wants his papers back. Mr. Reeve can come ask for them himself. The scarred man's hand drifted toward his hip, slow, testing. Eliza's hand was already on the revolver at her side, and she hadn't drawn it, but the way she stood made it clear she didn't need to rush. You shot at me once already, she said. Missed. Your man ran off before he could try twice. I'd think hard before a 3rd attempt. For a moment, nobody moved. Wyatt stood off to the side with a shotgun he didn't look comfortable holding. Nathaniel had the rifle up now, aimed at nothing in particular, but ready. There's 4 of us, the scarred man said. There were 3 men who talked to me before Reeves' people found them, Eliza said. All 3 are dead now. I've buried better men than you're sitting on right now, and I've still got the papers that put a rope around Reeves' neck. You want to be the 4th name I write down, or you want to ride back and tell him this ranch isn't worth it? It wasn't bravado. Nathaniel could hear that much in her voice, flat and certain, the voice of someone who had done this before and walked away every time. The scarred man studied her another moment, then looked past her to Nathaniel, to Wyatt, to the rifle and the shotgun both steady on him now. He pulled his horse's head around. This isn't finished, he said. It will be, Eliza answered. Soon. They rode off in the same dust they'd come in on, and nobody on that porch moved until the sound of hooves faded past the tree line. Wyatt let out a breath he'd clearly been holding the whole time. Nathaniel lowered the rifle slow, hands not quite steady. That's it, he said. That's all they're going to do. No, Eliza said. That's them deciding whether it's worth doing more. Reeve doesn't send men to ask twice unless he's already made up his mind to burn something down. She turned and looked at him, and for the first time since the station, there was something almost like an apology in her face. I need to ride into town, she said. There's a telegraph office and a federal marshal 3 counties over who's been waiting on word from me for 2 weeks. If I send it today, this ends inside the week. Reeve arrested, the county deeds unwound, all of it. And if you don't send it, then he keeps coming until one of us is dead. Probably more than one of us. Nathaniel set the rifle down against the porch rail. Then we ride to town, he said. Both of us. The ride into town took the better part of an hour, and neither of them said much along the way. Eliza kept the revolver close, the badge still pinned inside her coat. Nathaniel drove the wagon with the rifle across his lap, watching the tree lines on both sides of the road the whole way in. The telegraph office sat at the far end of the street, past the station where it had all started 2 days before. Eliza wrote out her message slow and careful, handed it to the operator, and waited while he tapped it out, letter by letter, the sound clicking through the small room like a clock counting something down. How long? Nathaniel asked. Marshall's 3 counties over. If he rides hard, 2 days. If he wires ahead to the county judge first, less than that. It took 4 days. The marshal came with 6 deputized men, and they didn't ride out to Reeves' place quiet. They rode down the main street in broad daylight, same as Reeves' men had ridden up to the ranch, and half the town came out onto the boardwalks to watch it happen. Nathaniel heard later that Reeve hadn't run, hadn't fought it. He'd been sitting in his office going over deeds when they came through the door, and he'd looked up like a man who'd known this day was coming for a while and had just been hoping it wouldn't. The papers Eliza carried did the rest. 3 years of ledgers, names, dates, money moved through accounts that didn't exist anywhere but on paper, land signed over under threats that a dozen different men were now willing to swear to in front of a judge. It took most of a month to unwind all of it, deed by deed, but it unwound. Nathaniel stood on the porch the morning Eliza told him she'd be leaving for Kansas City to testify. She had her coat on, the badge no longer hidden inside it, and the trunk sat by the door again, latched shut, though there wasn't much left in it that needed hiding anymore. You'll come back, he said. It wasn't quite a question. I've got testimony to give. A case to close out properly. Might take a few weeks. That's not what I asked. She looked at him a long moment, the same way she had back at the station, studying him like she was deciding something. I told the agency I was done after this one, she said. Told them before I ever got on that train west. This was supposed to be my last job. Was it? I didn't expect to like the last part of it, she said. The part after the shooting stopped. Wyatt was already out at the corral, pretending not to listen, the way he pretended not to look at her across the supper table that first night. Nathaniel picked up the trunk, same as he had at the station, and it was lighter now, most of what had made it heavy sitting in a federal courthouse instead. I'll drive you to the train, he said. She came back 7 weeks later. Nathaniel was out mending fence when he heard the wagon on the road, Wyatt driving it in from town, and he saw her sitting up front before he could make out her face clear. She'd sent word ahead, 1 line by telegraph. Case closed. Coming home. That word sat with him the rest of the day. Home. They married proper that spring, a small thing, just the county preacher and Wyatt and a handful of neighbors who'd heard the story by then in 6 different versions, most of them wrong in one way or another. Eliza kept the badge in a drawer in the room that had been Nathaniel's mother's, and some nights she'd take it out and look at it a while before putting it back, the way a person looks at an old photograph. The trunk stayed too, empty now except for a folded coat and a pair of boots worn thin at the heel. Nathaniel never asked her to get rid of it, and she never offered to. It sat at the foot of their bed like a marker of where she'd come from, and neither of them needed to open it anymore to remember what had been inside. Some evenings, sitting on that same porch, coffee going cold in her hands, she'd tell him a little more of it. Not all at once. Just pieces, the way a person hands over something precious slow, testing whether it's safe to let go. He always waited. He'd learned that much was worth the wait.